And David is not here at the moment. Yeah, can you started recording? If you can also start recording, David, but I see that your internet connection is very poor. So since Frederic has already done some recording, could I ask Frederic if you can record the afternoon sessions? Okay, I'm going to, he's not hearing now. I'm going to send him, right, okay. Okay, Frederic, so in order to record, you go to Actions. That would be the Actions menu, File, Edit, View, Meeting Tools, Actions, and you choose Record Session. You leave the default value for everything, which is point of view and quality settings, and you press Record, and that's it. So I'm going to give the floor to Lincoln as soon as you confirm that you have started recording. Yes, thanks. So thank you very much for coming back to the afternoon session, and the first speaker is Lincoln Cannon. Lincoln, you have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Julia. Can everyone hear me all right? Good. Like others today, I'm going to call your attention to the subject of our dead. The founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, gave a sermon on that same subject a few months before he was killed. And he dedicated that sermon to his dead friend, King Follett. Today I'm going to share with you an interpretive variation on that sermon in memory of my father, Lane Cannon. He was among the inventors of the word processor, an early engineer of software that became WordPerfect, and eventually was the vice president of engineering for the business of that same name. November 27th of this year would have been his 61st birthday, but he was consumed by repeated cancers and died 13 years ago at age 48. Most, if not all of you, have also lost friends, so I feel to speak on the subject of our dead generally and offer you my ideas for consolation. I ask sincerely for your hope and trust that I may speak truth, particularly of the sort that carries conviction to hearts and minds of its trustworthiness. Truth of the sort we should create to the extent we don't discover it, so that even if you happen to think it's not true yet, you'll forgive me for thinking it is, and join me in the work to make it so. Trust at least that my voice could be true. Relax inclinations to skepticism and let hope inspire a strenuous mood. That is powerful and effective prayer. There's strength here, and I'm confident our prayer will matter. Before I enter fully into the subject of our dead, I'll provide some context. I wish to go back to when gods, without beginning, find themselves making worlds without end. There's the starting point for us to look to. To understand the subject of our dead, we must start with an understanding of God. If we start right, it's easier to go right. But if we start wrong, we may go wrong, and it would be hard to get right. There are few in our world who understand rightly the nature of God. The great majority of humans comprehend little about their relationship to God. So they know little more than the beast, little more than to eat, drink, sleep. That's all humanity knows without inspiration. And I mean that by definition, not hypothetically. The beast eats, drinks, sleeps, and knows nothing more about God. Yet it knows as much as we, except to the extent we comprehend God. If humans don't comprehend God, they don't comprehend themselves. I want to go back to when gods, without beginning, find themselves making worlds without end, and so lift our minds to a more lofty sphere and a more exalted understanding than what the human mind generally aspires to. I want to ask this group, each of you, to answer this question in your own heart. What kind of being is God? Put aside creeds and dogmas, ask yourself, turn your thought into your own heart, and ask if you've seen, heard, or communed with God. I repeat the question, what kind of being is God? Do you know? Have you seen, heard, or communed with God? Going forward, the question will perhaps occupy your attention more than before. If any of us can explain or convey an understanding of God so that the aesthetic seals itself in our hearts, then we should never again speak or act against prophets. But if all fail, we should renounce any pretension to inspiration or inheritance of revelation, and welcome each other as reformed sinners or crackpots, hailed as friends, no longer offenders of the religious, nor fools to the irreligious. In any case, if we're all honest enough to renounce our pretensions when our ignorance is shown, we'd all be as bad as each other. We might as well shun or ridicule you as me. And if that's justified, where would be the end? Who wouldn't suffer? But we shouldn't oppress others for their religion, if it doesn't call for oppressing us. Everyone should have the right to be a false prophet or a true one. Indeed, as Moses says in the Bible, I wish that all were prophets. In that spirit, we're going to inquire after God, to know and be familiar with God. And if we succeed, then we'll also know something about prophecy. So let's go back to when gods, without beginning, find themselves making worlds without end, to show the kind of being God is. What sort of being was God? I wish the world could hear it. God was once as we are now, and is a post-human. That's the great secret. If time and space want to reveal the God whose power created our world and innumerable others, if we were to see God here and now, we would see post-humanity. Pre-humanity evolved within the contours of its environment. Humanity projected itself on that environment, and post-humanity realized that projection. The gods created worlds in their own image, watched those things that they had ordered until they obeyed, and thus created humanity in their own image. In order to understand the subject of our dead, for consolation of those who mourn the loss of friends, we must understand how God came to be. I'm going to tell you how God came to be God. We've imagined and supposed that God was God forever. I reject that idea, and so should you. God was once like us. God, our Creator, yes, lived in a world like ours. These are incomprehensible ideas to some, but they're simple. The first principle of the gospel of Christ is to trust in God, and not just any God, but rather the God that was once like us. That's Jesus' good news. And I wish I could tell it to the fundamentalists like an archangel from the apocalypse, so their dogmatizing would cease forever. What does Jesus say? The Son can do only what he sees his Father doing. As the Father has life in himself, so has he granted the Son to have life in himself. What does Jesus do? He lays down his life, and he takes it up again. Only what he sees his Father doing. Do the fundamentalists believe it? If they don't, then they don't believe the Bible. Now this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God. And we've got to learn how to be gods ourselves, the same as all gods have done before us, by going from one small degree to another, and from a small capacity to a great one, from compassion to compassion, from creation to creation, until we can resurrect our dead and are able to live in everlasting love and light as do those who live in everlasting power. And in these times of accelerating change, this proposition is serious. These are the first principles of consolation. How consoling to mourners when they must part with a friend, to know that although their bodies go down and dissolve, they shall rise again to live in everlasting love and light. As the Bible says, we will be heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. What is that? To gain the same love, the same light, the same power, until we become God, the same as those who have gone before, not merely as their prosthetics, but rather as genuinely compassionate creators in ourselves. The Bible tells of two persons aspiring to godhood. One will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. In contrast, Jesus, being in the very nature a God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, Jesus says to his Father, I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do, and now, Father, glorify me in your presence. Jesus exemplifies godhood not egotistically, but rather altruistically, in cooperation with his Father, so that they would be glorified together. Likewise, Jesus says to his disciples, I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything, and I will do it. If you love me, keep my commands. So Jesus further exemplifies and invites us to cooperative altruism. Love post-humanity with all your heart and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love humanity as yourself, not as being human, but rather as becoming post-human. Trust in and change toward post-humanity. These are the first principles of the gospel of Christ, about which so much has been said. When we climb up a ladder, we must begin at the bottom and ascend step by step until we arrive at the top. And so it is with these principles. We must learn the first before learning others. Even as we change, transfigured or resurrected to post-humanity, we will continue to learn. For now, we don't even have the anatomical or environmental capacity to comprehend our Creator. I suppose I shouldn't speculate excessively beyond what experience and logic warrant. If I do, rationality itself will cry treason and start ridiculing me. So I'll turn to old-fashioned logic for a while. I'll comment on the simulation argument. I want to analyze it. As the philosopher wrote it, at least one of the following propositions is true. 1. The human species is very likely to go extinct before reaching a post-human stage. 2. Any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history or variations thereof. 3. We are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. It follows that the belief that there is a significant chance that we will one day become post-humans who run ancestor simulations is false, unless we are currently living in a simulation. The argument can be generalized to all feasible creation mechanisms, whether they be computation, terraforming, or cosmoforming, or even resurrection itself, which from the inside could be indistinguishable from the others. If you disagree with logic. Logicians can do no more than I'm telling you. Thus, it follows that belief will one day become post-humans who create worlds or resurrect the dead is false, unless we are currently living in a created world. I want the atheist transhumanists that ridicule religion to understand, so I'll simplify. We almost certainly will not be the only or first to create worlds like those in our past. Without beginning, gods find themselves making worlds without end. Some suppose contemporary science and technological trends will make us the first gods, but they're wrong. The logicians say if you trust in anything not warranted by experience and logic, we'll cry treason. Yet how can we escape extinction except God be with us? Reason binds us. As we've looked at the world, we've found life everywhere. Yet as we look at the heavens, not recognizing post-humanity, we are tempted to despair. If humans are probable, then we are destined for extinction. That is the conclusion warranted by experience. And that is the conclusion warranted by logic, unless post-humanity already exists. I'm grateful for logic, but I'm also grateful for that sublime aesthetic in our hearts, which encourages our will to post-humanity. Logicians, reason with me. If God does not exist, we will not become God. Without beginning, gods find themselves making worlds without end. When we start this way, we start to learn about the living God, transcendent, and immanent, what we should worship, and how we should worship. We approach Godhood, and we ask not just any way, but rather we ask so as to receive answers, both with our voices and with our actions. The heavens unfold to us, and nothing is withheld. Whether there be one God or many gods, they are discovered and created. If there are bounds to the worlds, they are discovered and created. When we are ready to come to God, God is ready to come to us. Now, why do so many of the religious say that God created the world out of nothing? The reasons are creeds and dogmas, which make it blasphemy to contradict their idea. If you tell them that God made the world out of something, they'll call you a fool. But we've learned to know more, and the sublime aesthetic in us would do more. So I'll associate myself with that. You ask the religious why they say the world is created out of nothing, and many will answer, doesn't the Bible say God created the world? And they infer from the word create that it must have been made out of nothing. Now, the word create came from a Hebrew word that does not mean to create out of nothing. Rather, it means something like organize or shape, as we would organize materials to shape a ship. Hence, the Bible suggests God had materials to organize the world out of chaos, chaotic matter and energy. Matter existed from the time God existed. Matter can never be destroyed. It may be organized and reorganized, but not destroyed. It had no beginning and can have no end. I'll mention another subject, which is calculated to exalt humanity. But I can't say much about it. I'll just touch on it because time won't permit more. It's associated with the subject of the resurrection of our dead. The soul, the spirit, or the mind. Where did it come from? Most theologians say that God created us from nothing, but we shouldn't believe it. The idea lessens humanity. I'm going to tell of things more noble. We say that God has always existed. Who told us so? How did it get into our heads? Who told us that humanity didn't always exist? Well, humanity has always existed in potential and pattern. God created our world and our bodies from cascading causes. How does it read in the Bible? It doesn't say God created us from nothing. It says God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Humanity, in the broadest sense, has always existed with God. So when we mourn, what have we lost? Our friends are only separated from their bodies for a little moment, as it were, and they still exist in cascading effects on our relations and our minds, the same as we do, although temporarily less empowered than we are. This is the immortal aspect of humanity. Is it logical to say that our minds are immortal, and yet that they had a beginning? That which has a beginning may also have an end. Although we change, we had no beginning. Neither will we have an end. There never was a time when we did not exist in causes, nor will there ever be a time when we will not exist in effects. Unique in time and space, and yet thoroughly and pervasively interconnected, we have always existed and always will exist with God. All the theologians from the beginning of history who say that the human mind had a beginning prove that it must have an end. And if that's true, then we'll eventually go extinct. But if I'm right, God never had the power to create humanity from nothing. God could not create God from nothing. In the broadest sense, we have always existed, information forever, and there's no creation about it, although we'll change. Aspects of humanity always exist with God. Without beginning, gods find themselves in the midst of chaos and potential. And because gods are more intelligent, they make worlds without end, whereby the rest can advance. Gods make others more intelligent, that all may increase in light and love, knowledge and power, through and for each other. These are good principles. They taste good. I can taste good principles, and so can you. You say honey is sweet, and so do I. When we receive good principles, we know they're good. In life, we experience everything precisely as though we had no bodies at all. And anything we learn that will preserve our minds will also preserve our bodies. So we have a responsibility, an awful responsibility, in relation to our dead. What of all who didn't learn to preserve their minds while alive? Can we do nothing for our friends who died without an opportunity to prepare? Can they be saved, although their bodies are decaying in the graves? Our greatest responsibility in this world is to seek after our dead. We can't be whole without them. They can't be whole without us, and thus our obligation. We should trust in the possibility of resurrecting our dead, according to the foretellings of the prophets. As the Bible says, turn the hearts of the parents to their children, and the hearts of the children to their parents. Imagine a post-human genealogist. Using the tools of quantum archaeology, she traces backwards through time and space, from effects to causes. Sampling a sufficiently large portion of her present, she attains a desired probabilistic precision for a portion of her past, and she generates you. The future you is distinguishable from the present you, but no more so than the today you is distinguishable from the yesterday you. You are resurrected, and you learn to repeat the process for your friends. As mourners, we have occasion to rejoice. My father, Lane Cannon, is gone only until the resurrection of our dead. To rise and reunite with my family and his friends in love and in light. We all have parents, siblings, children, and friends who have gone, but they are only absent for a moment. They persist in effects, and we'll meet them again when we or our descendants become God. We will raise our dead, so we may become God together. I trust this, and so should you. Although we should take risks seriously, the sublime aesthetic moves us against fear and to action. Although we may mourn or weep, we expect our friends. And more, we actively invite our friends to rise with us in the morning of the resurrection. Are there any questions?
Something that you can do, Link, to read the question, you click on the question and it should stay there instead of moving on the screen.
Oh, thank you. All right. So the first question I see, in your God hypothesis and in your position of this God, does God punish, and could he punish eternally? So first question there, I won't speak for everyone who trusts in God, but the God that I trust in isn't concerned with punishing arbitrarily. Let's see, could God be completely unassociated with the Jesus hypothesis? Yes, I think there's lots of God hypotheses that can be unassociated with the Jesus hypotheses, although I think that narrow understandings of the Jesus hypothesis are not nearly as useful as broad understandings of the Jesus hypothesis, and that those broad hypotheses related to Jesus are quite compatible with many religions that don't use the word Jesus. That's a long topic. If you guys want to ask more questions about that, I could dig into that more. How do you deal with others who adhere in their God hypotheses and yet completely disagree with you? We talk about it. I'm not going to kill them if that's your question. Can I be free to not associate with God and yet remain not condemned? Absolutely. As such, could it be that many so did and found different ways to godhood and have found different, overlapping, and sometimes mutually exclusive altruistic existences? Sure. And if so, in what state of agreement, love, mutual blindness, feud, or stubborn resentment do they remain? My opinion on that relates back to what you call the Jesus hypothesis. For me, the Jesus hypothesis, or what I would call Christ, is about overcoming those disagreements, those tensions, those conflicts between our minds and our bodies and our relations and our worlds that is the atonement of Christ that Jesus and his disciples taught us in the Bible. So overcoming those disagreements is what Christianity should be about, so far as I'm concerned. And if the ascension hypothesis common in transhuman thinking is true, and we may evolve to a fully transcended state, how can we be singular when the nature of evolution seems rather to be great diversity? I don't think that we need to be singular in any monolithic, narrow, absolute sense. I think there's a kind of unity that arises from complexity. In fact, I would argue that complexity itself can't develop without a foundation that permits it. The world that we live in now is probably the most complex in the history of humanity, certainly is the most complex in the history of humanity. And the only reason it can exist is because of a great deal of cooperation, more than we've ever had in the history of humanity. So that cooperation, that unity underlies that great complexity and diversity. If I didn't get to your questions well enough, I'd be happy to revisit some of those. Yes, it only functions with competition and democratic freedoms. I agree that those should be part of what I'm talking about. I'm not arguing against them. If I program a sentient being in a simulated reality, am I God? Well, there's lots of kinds of gods, and yes, according to one definition of God, sure, you could be God. I don't think all gods are worthy of worship, and by worship I mean emulation, striving to become like them, idealizing them, pursuing those attributes, those virtues in ourselves. The God that I think models emulation in a way, or models virtues in a way that we should emulate, I associate with Christ, but not dogmatically. I'm happy to talk about it in other terms. But that is a God of compassion, a God that doesn't set itself above other gods, a God that would make us all God together. And what does that mean? Well, so it can mean all kinds of things. We have to care about what others desire. We have to care about the rules of other communities, and we have to care about reconciling those desires and those rules to ourselves. That, for me, is what it means to be Christian. If I program competition, it seems to me far more likely that evolution predates any God than that God predates evolution. Comment. I don't know if there is a first God. I don't know if I can tell you this much: we're not going to become gods unless gods already exist, as I've emphasized in the presentation I shared with you. Could there have been a first God? Very improbably. I don't know. I don't know that anybody can answer that. Perhaps not even the gods could answer that question. Hey, might I be reinstated as a quantum archaeologist once? Why might I not be resurrected millions of times by many of which might have nefarious plans with my resurrected body? How is this resurrection related to godhood rather than to massive potential predation? That's a great question. One of the areas that I didn't explore a whole lot in my presentation is something I call the benevolence argument. If you go to thenewgodargument.com, you can read more about it there. But basically, I would argue that there are natural moral hurdles to the attainment of increasingly complex and powerful technologies. And so we have good reason to suppose that those who are more advanced technologically than us and have greater technological power than us are more benevolent than us. I think that we're increasingly seeing evidence for this in sociological studies of human history as well, where when we look into the past, we see great violence, we see terrible lives for children, we see things that we now just take for granted around us, we couldn't have taken for granted in the past. The world was a much worse place in the past than it is presently, and I expect that will continue to be the case as we continue to advance. And if we don't advance in our ability to cooperate, I think our civilization will collapse. Let's see. Calling the first cause God is simply growing tired and saying God did it. Yeah, I'm not talking about first causes. I don't concern myself with them. There may be a first cause, there may not. I have no idea. I suspect there might not be one. But where did this God come from when we hear God was not always the ultimate post-human. There must logically be an original reality rather than turtles all the way down. No, not necessarily. Logic does not entail there must be an original or first. It also doesn't entail that there wasn't an original or first. I simply don't know the answer to that question. In practice, is there any difference in what we do or what is important, whether we are original, becoming of gods, or are new variations of original conditions? Wonderful question, a very practical question. Should we behave any differently if we are the first or if we're not the first? I don't think that we should. I think either way, we should be acting with the benevolence required to increase the complexity and power of our civilization so that we can benefit each other and become those gods that all of human religion for millennia has aspired to through their worship. Now, that being the case, we're not going to do it unless gods already exist. There has to have been a first species. Oops, I'm losing my position, I'm sorry. There has to have been a first species. Reaching godhood or your premise is logically faulty. Some species that was not in a simulation. Well, I disagree. That's actually not accurate. There's no reason why there has to be a first. There may have been. And, 1 in a sextillion chance, we're that. But, again, we're not. Serene, what's wrong with turtles all the way down? It is the simplest model. It might be turtles all the way down. There's also a third possibility. Instead of turtles all the way down, or instead of there being a first turtle, it may be indefinite in the sense that, and this might sound really strange to you, but it's an idea that I'm exploring and don't have a whole lot of good stuff to say about it at the time except to say that I'm exploring it. Maybe the search for deeper turtles creates them, in a sense. So I won't say any more about that. I'll start to sound really, really seriously strange. If there is no ground, no turtle gets squished. That's right. No, they collapse into a singularity. You have no causality if there was no such species. It becomes hopefully, you mean hopelessly, I suppose, circular. One eternal round is part of many religions. Many religions have talked about circularity to history. And I don't know that that's not the case. Again, I'm not telling you that it is the case, but I'm just saying that we don't have evidence that it shouldn't be the case. When you reach sufficient gravitational mass, quantum turtles, great turtle explanation, Lincoln. Any other questions? All right, Julio, I think I'm finished.
No other questions that I can